Welcome to a special episode of The Kicker. We're here at Jimmy's Corner, the legendary boxing bar in Times Square, where many generations of journalists have had a drink or three. And I'm very delighted to be here with my friend Tim Marchman, who loves Jimmy's Corner and is also a great journalist. He's now the director of politics, science, and security at Wired. Previously, he was at Gizmodo Media Group, Deadspin, and Vice. And Marchman, welcome to The Kicker.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you about Wired. Wired has been a very buzzy publication of late, and specifically Wired as it relates to like the changing nature of technology coverage and access. So you started at Wired in 2024 to run politics, security, science. Why did you want to go do politics stuff at Wired, a place that was not to that point known for politics stuff?
Well, because Wired is great and politics are great and they go well together. No, I mean, so Katie Drummond, when she came in to run Wired overall, she's talked about this. One of the things she immediately thought was pretty evident was that it needed to be covering politics, because if you were going to cover the main players in tech, be they oligarchs or companies, you had to be covering their relations in DC. Just the companies are too big. They have connections to, their interests are just too powerful in DC in terms of regulation, in terms of their increasingly getting involved and throwing their weight behind candidates and other candidates. And there was definitely a segment of the readership that basically gave a thing we know from working at Deadspin, which is, the equivalent of stick to sports. Like, I don't want politics in my tech coverage. And, I think it pretty soon bore out that was impossible. Not long after the desk was started up, Elon Musk insinuated himself into a presidential race and functionally bought the executive branch of the government. You can be the person who most wants to just stick to gadgets. You cannot cover a company like X or a company like SpaceX or Neuralink or any of his many other concerns without covering the fact that he was acting as de facto president or prime minister or whatever you want to put it. So luckily we were very well positioned to cover that. And I think even though it's not been that long, there's been a pretty big shift in how people view the relationship between these two spheres. And in an alternate universe where we didn't have a politics desk, it would be a huge, gaping, obvious void.
So you started during the run-up to the presidential election. We'll talk about what Wired politics coverage has become. But coming into this job, what did you think it was going to be? What were your plans, not knowing, A, who was going to win the election, B, certainly what came after?
Well, I didn't really have plans because I never make plans. The first thing with regards to our politics coverage specifically is I wasn't starting up from scratch. We had Leah Feiger, who's a wonderful journalist. And she had started the desk, and she continues to run politics coverage day to day, also involved with our science coverage. So I was in the very fortunate position of just coming into an operation that was already spun up, already working well, and just saying what can we do to be useful here, and what is the scope of our coverage going to be? I philosophically, as an editor, I like to start with the interests of the interests of the reporters. There are things you have to cover. There are certainly times when you have to say even though nobody is particularly well sourced up in this or just actively wants not to cover it, we still have to cover it. But for the most part, we saw pretty clear lanes for us to do coverage. So my idea was largely revolved around how do we do what we're doing better? How do we provide something that's really differentiated and is not, an appendage of our tech coverage. I think to the extent we had a lightning bolt moment, it was, I thought at the time, and I still think is pretty pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. It's just Elon is getting involved, really involved in this race. He's fully MAGA. He's fully on board. Where he goes, people like him are going to follow. So we just need to follow what he's doing. And that ended up being a lot more than we thought it was going to be. But in terms of, the storylines and characters we were following, to my end, I don't know how much it matters. You can't plan too much assuming one person is going to win or the other person is going to win or this person is going to have, this job or anything like that. You're just trying to cover things as they happen and be in a position to follow them as they develop, which I know is really boring, but it's true.
I've also seen Katie say that you all expected disinformation to be like a huge part of the election in a way that it didn't.
Yeah, that's
as
absolutely.
Much
Yeah, I mean, I'm being a little disingenuous here. I mean, we certainly had plans for stuff we want to cover. One thing that was top of mind was just the possibilities of AI in particular, just synthetic media to really impact elections, and we had, we were tracking that, and we did a lot of work on that, but that is definitely receded as a concern. And when I think about it, it's much less the scenarios that, we and others were thinking about a couple of years where, I was thinking of kind of an October surprise, like some sort of non-falsifiable video comes out that's incredibly damaging in the last week or two before the election, and it really swings things, not so much because it's ultra convincing and everybody believes it's authentic footage, but because it introduces enough doubt, or just the way negative advertising works, right? You don't have to have people believe something, you have to have them exposed to it, and it just introduces an element of doubt. That I thought was pretty likely, but since then I think it's become clear that like AI in elections, at least for now and probably for a while, it's more that it allows people to operate at scale. It allows supercharged versions of the things we were already familiar with.
So then Musk is very involved in the election, standing on stage with Donald Trump, all of those things. When did you start to figure out like, oh, this is going to be like more long-lasting influence than I thought?
Well, it was really when he started talking about the idea of the Department of Government Efficiency and citing himself in a future administration as somebody who had a very direct role, and especially, it wasn't when this came because this was very shortly before the election, but for me personally, the alarm bell started really going off when he started talking about cutting $2 trillion from the budget, because I was like, oh my God, he's never looked at the budget. No one around him has told him to look at the budget. $2 trillion is, everything the government is not obliged to spend, like including the Defense Department. Like that's what he's talking about. So it wasn't a concern about, oh my God, this guy's going to somehow cut $2 trillion out of the government. It's like he is clearly going to be given some sort of powerful role despite having no idea what he's talking about at all. And so that, that became the initial animating force. We were looking at a lot of the preparations for the new administration. We'd obviously been covering Project 2025 and other things, and thought there was a pretty clear roadmap for what people were intending to do. When people have asked, like, how did you know this, or how did you know to look in that? And it's like, we listened to people. Like, we took them seriously when they said, if we get power, this is what we were going to do. And really tried to solve on a really, really, really basic level. Like, what is a Department of Government Efficiency? A department has to be established by Congress. Like, you can't just start that up by executive order. There has to be a process. So it's like, are we envisioning something that's a legal department? If we are not, what would it be? And the best thing we could come up with was a federal advisory committee that might be called the Department of Government Efficiency. And so we started reading a lot of really boring stuff and talking to a lot of really interesting experts who know about boring stuff about federal advisory committees. What are their powers? What's the oversight for them? What can they actually do? And although it ended up not being one, having been thinking about it in those terms, not of like, what are powerful people saying? What are we speculating? What are we analyzing? But just looking at like the nitty gritty, like logistical particulars of like, how would you organize an operation that allowed Elon Musk to have authority? within the executive branch put us in a pretty good spot to cover what he did, like once January 20th came along and he had that power.
Mm-hmm. I've known you for a long time. I know that you love few things more than like getting into the nitty gritty of like how is a federal government committee set up versus a department versus whatever. As like a manager, how do you go about like sort of getting everybody else excited about that? And like one struggle that I think journalism managers sometimes have these days is like everybody wants to do like the big story, right? Which is not necessarily the same, at least in the early days, of as digging into the nitty gritty. So like, can you talk a little bit about the management that went into this? Because not everybody dreams of doing that in the same way that you do.
Well, I was lucky because my colleagues were excited about that. And so it was almost, from a managerial perspective, I would almost say it was a question of just keeping our eyes on that and not falling into a fog. Because when you're trying to answer what seems like a very basic question and no one has an answer for it, it can be very easy to like lose track of it or just get lost in the mists of like talking to people who know people and they're giving you their informed insider speculation and you can go with that. And just kind of trying to encourage us as a team to continue following that question, even when it seemed like we might never get an answer to it. Like, I think that is the thing more than anything else that, you know, I felt was important, was like, we may never get an answer to that question. If we don't, that doesn't mean this time has been wasted. Like we strongly collectively feel that's the question to be answering. So like, let's just keep asking it.
It seemed like a lot of other outlets were sort of caught flat-footed when Doge became a really powerful, like really active part of the government. Is that what you think was behind that? Like, you were willing to do the prep work to answer the basic questions, and like, did other people skip over that? Give me some media criticism here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can really easily, I hate the word, but you can really easily gaslight yourself, right? If you have, like, I think it's generally good in any line of coverage to just be thinking about like two things, right? Like, what are people doing as opposed to what they're saying, or at least what can they do? What obstacles would there be in the way of their doing what they say they want to do? Like, those are answerable questions, or at least ones you can pursue, and in not answering them, you can find interesting stuff out. But it can be frustrating because sometimes it doesn't make for very good copy. A lot of times it doesn't make for very good copy. And also when you have a story like Elon and the administration coming together, there is pressure. You feel internal pressure as a reporter or an editor or a manager. You have external pressure from readers. You have external pressure from people above you. Like, where are our stories on this? Like, when are we going to figure this out? And that's not to say like anyone is doing anything wrong with that. All those pressures are real. It is hard to just stick to, we don't know, and we're trying to figure it out. Like, there are a lot of reasons not to do that. So I feel like, to frame this positively, I would say, I think for a lot of reasons, among them that, you know, Wired is not a politics publication. It's not our bread and butter. If we don't have anything to say about this developing storyline, it's important to our desk. It's not central to the identity of the publication. If you are the Washington Post, you have dozens of people who have to be filing every day, and they have to be running stuff about this. So I can understand why you fall into this pattern of going with what people say and paying a little bit less attention to what they do. My more negative criticism would be, I think it's really easy to just fall into, these people are saying this to me, and that's the news, and I can go with that, and you're falling for a magic trick. It's like sleight of hand. Like, your job is not to fall for that, but a lot of the people who do it are really good, and they gull some of our best journalists. I have certainly been gulled this way. So,
how did you and the team go about getting sourced up? Because, like, definitionally, a lot of these people were new, right? So it wasn't like, oh, Leah's been in the politics world forever. She has relationships with these people going back, because these people like had not been anyone before then in a lot of cases.
So I'm going to go on, for obvious reasons, on some of this. What I will say is generally our team had a lot of connections in a lot of different areas, like, not just our politics team. I mean, our coverage of Doge was our whole newsroom. So we had people in politics, we had people in tech. We had reporters who were very well sourced in those areas. We had reporters who had been boning up on all the stuff I'm just talking about, like, just the day-to-day mechanics of how things work. And we were able to, through those, get a pretty good idea of, you're starting to hear from people inside the government who are saying, oh, these weird guys are showing up. No one knows who they are. That's where I think the preparation comes in, where you're not dismissing that as an oddity and saying, oh, that's an interesting, colorful little story. You're like, oh shit. Like, I think I have an idea of what's happening. So that's, preparation, meeting your sourcing. But one thing I will say is that once we were able to do some of our initial stories that were just talking about what was going on inside the government and who was participating in that, like, one of the really simple little things we did was just get everybody on Signal and start putting tip lines in every story. We really, like, when we were posting stories to Reddit, or when we were, posting stories to like any platform, we were trying to prominently highlight Signal handles, and we were just trying to make it as easy as possible for people to get in touch with us. And I know that's like a really basic, boring, mechanical thing, but we, as many other outlets do, just wanted people to, who we had never talked to be able to get in touch with us. And that ended up being, in that coverage, one of the challenges for us was like, how do you coordinate the fact that, because we're doing all these stories and a bunch of reporters are doing them, and they're getting floods, like hundreds of people getting in touch. How do we coordinate that? How do we share information among the different reporters? Like, we manage all that, but like, basically it was as easy as, like, we talk about this in all our coverage, and we think about this in all our coverage, is like, you start with the small thing or the basic thing, the thing of like, what is a Department of Government Efficiency? Is that a department? And you start building from there, and you just build it iteratively. And you want to get to the point where, you have real authority on it. You can do like you do the 50,000 word feature, you do the mega scoop that exposes everything and makes sense of everything. But the start is part of that iterative process is just like literally just making clear, like, we are here, we are listening. And I think a thing that particularly helped with us is that a couple of facets of Wired. One is we have a world-beating security team, which has published a great deal of information about keeping your communications confidential. That gave us a certain authority in terms of people who were extremely vulnerable, not just in the way that a lot of potentially vulnerable sources are, but we're specifically concerned about an administration that had access to tools that could allow for like really pervasive surveillance, and they had no idea whether or not they were using them, right? So it's not just your normal whistleblower has a lot of reasons to be worried about their communications being secure. In these cases, you're blowing the whistle on people who, for all you know, may have the full power of the NSA being directed at U.S. citizens. You just don't know. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we were able to credibly, when we, not only get people reaching out to us by like broadly advertising how to do so, and a publication that has a record of being knowledgeable and serious about secure communications, but we also had like a very good framework for when people reach out and they say, I'm not going to tell you who I am. I'm not going to tell you what part of the government I work for, if I indeed work at the government for all. But hypothetically, if I knew somebody who had information to share, like, what steps would you take? Like, we have very good answers to all that, right? So that's one thing. And then allied to that, we also had and have people on staff who are, very technically capable, and a deep bench of sources and experts we can consult who are technically capable. So if people are coming to us and they're not to in any way put down people who are saying this, but you get a lot of sources coming forward who are like, this sort of thing is happening. I can't really prove it, but I want you to be aware it's happening. It's like, okay, that's really helpful. But in terms of like the raw corroboration, you do have sources who are giving you, more involved materials, or they want to walk you through how a process is happening. That we had the resources, either the reporters to directly talk to them who like intimately understood that, or who could help a colleague who doesn't and say like, okay, you're getting this stuff you don't understand from this source. Like I can make sense of this. I can connect you with someone who can help you make sense of this, so that like if somebody's coming to you with something that is kind of technical and just something they take for granted as far as how they do their job, but that would be difficult to explain to anybody else, they're going to be a lot more open and detailed in what they're talking about if they can assume a certain technological literacy on the part of the person they're talking to. Like, and this isn't something that means that you need to be like a technologist. It's like in like one of our good sources for stories we did was like reading manuals. I mean, we're talking about the federal government. So if you're talking about like specific computer systems, for instance, the architecture of those is largely going to be laid out online. So, like I'll just talk about myself personally. I've definitely had sources who are coming to me and they're like, I work at X and X and X, and Y and Z are interesting. I will tell them like, I don't know a ton about that, but I'm seeing that there's literally like an operator's manual for this. Like I'm going to take a little while, get up to speed. I'm still going to be the guy saying poor K, but it doesn't mean I'm fluent in what you're talking about, but if I can put in the time, I can get up to the point where you can speak in your own language a little more, and that'll help you just get your story out. Because all we want, right, is for people to just be able to freely talk about what they have to say without things getting in the way, like the reporter whose work they trust at the outlet they trust has no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
That's a barrier.
Well, and this also speaks to one of the things that was most interesting to me about your coverage over the past couple of years is that in some ways it was like very literally a tech story, right? Because it was about these government technology systems that in some cases were super ancient, and in some cases only Carl knows how to fix it, and Doge fired Carl, and in some cases these infants who are now in charge of the federal government are coming in and breaking the system and then don't even know Carl exists. So like can you talk a little bit about like the covering this as like a hard tech story and like those systems that it turns out actually keep our government functioning?
Yeah, if you want to talk about it in terms of like big picture media criticism, I think when you talk about covering politics, it's kind of a misnomer, right? Because you're talking about entirely separate things. You're talking about electoral politics, you're talking about the policy apparatus, and then you're just talking about the federal government itself, which is millions of people distributed across all these independent but related agencies, each with their own tech stack. One of the things that we, as a team, and by we, I mean the reporters I work with who are much smarter than me, immediately grasped here was that by Doge getting early access into the Office of Personnel Management and the General Services Administration in particular, it was really brilliant. I mean, not to say good, but this was a brilliant scheme because the weakness of the federal government, and in a lot of ways the strength, is it's distributed, mutually non-interoperable systems, code that dates back to the Stone Age that only Carl knows how to code, right? That makes it hard to take it all over. You do have some agencies that have tendrils and in some cases unexercised legal authorities that allow them to be present in all of those places, right? And that was immediately clear to some of the people at Wired, like McKenna Kelly and Tori Elliott, and that they're grabbing the one thin thread that runs through all these things, and if you did that would allow you to manipulate all these systems at one time, or it would allow you entree and access to all these things. And so like one of the things we were really curious about was just who was getting permissions to do what, and how visible was that to other people. And in that case, without talking about anything, too wacky or confidential with regards to sourcing, I can say like one thing we exploited was the fact that personnel directories are largely public in the federal government, right? So there were definitely cases where, we were able to identify what person was going to what agency by like looking their name up in the directory. That is very much not just at the nitty gritty level of like really technical stories we did about like who was doing what with federal payment systems, and do they have write access or do they have read access or things like that, which did get into those nitty gritty areas, but was also just like literally looking at it as a single unified entity and reporting on it the same way you would report on a big tech company, right? Like if you're reporting on Meta, if you're reporting on Alphabet, it's great if you have the secret inside source who's like, here's the secret source code for Project X to turn everybody into a mind-controlled cyborg. Like, you love that, but a lot of the really useful stuff is going to be really boring. Like, you're probably more in the position of saying, I've heard some people, like Mark Zuckerberg is said to be really interested in turning people into like cyborgs he can control remotely. And like, I heard Todd was on that project. And so you talk to Cindy and, maybe you're telling Cindy like, I'm really interested in any projects Todd is working on, and you're not doing any sort of soliciting of proprietary information or anything like that. But Cindy does have access to like the company Slack, and maybe Cindy is looking at the company Slack and she's like, Mark Zuckerberg's secret evil project. I can see who the members of that group are, and I can say, I don't know what Todd's doing, but I know Todd's in that Slack group. And does that get you to the ultimate story? No, but that is like powerful confirmatory evidence that Todd, whose LinkedIn you can access, and you see that he has spent his whole career working on distributed machine learning systems that only have application if you want to make evil cyborgs, is working on this. Theoretically, and you start, that's how you start assembling those things. And like, it's again another area where, if you are covering the government, not even like as a tech firm, but the same way you would cover a tech firm, you exploit the fact that like people put all sorts of stuff on the internet, and they put their public resumes on the internet, and they maintain personal websites that expose way more information than they should, and they keep their LinkedIns up. And even if they scrape all that stuff off the internet, if you know where to look, the residue of it is there, and there you have material that's not only really helpful to you in pursuing your story, but that your competitors might not be able to get at. So, it all becomes a virtuous, self-perpetuating, forward-moving operation.
Mm-hmm. One of the first Wired scoops that I think came to the attention of a lot of people who might not have followed Wired before was the one just saying, like, look, a lot of these Doge, like, very high-level people are 19 and 20 and 21 years old, and here's who they are. I'm not asking you to reveal your sources, but, like, can you talk a little bit about how that story came together, and also like what that started to unlock? Because it felt like a lot of things started cascading from there.
A lot of it was that process I was just talking about of like, once you do a story like that, you have established to potential sources that you have sources, what's going on to some extent, and that you are willing to go out on a limb with a story like that, right? Like one of the things about that story, it's funny because we did a story earlier that week that had identified a lot of what was going on, that there were people being summoned into random Zoom meetings by people they didn't know who appeared very young, and people whose names were unknown to anybody were inviting people to meetings and things like that. And we had a line in there that was like, Wired is not identifying these people because of their ages or something like that. I forget exactly what the line is. And people were furious about that. Their assumption was that we thought that these bright young bulbs, it would be unfair to expose them to public scrutiny or anything like that, when it was exactly the opposite. We didn't want to sit on this story until we had been able to confirm everything, but we were literally, in some cases, we were unsure if they were of age, and we were unsure if they were government employees. And so it becomes like something of a legal question about, like, if you did have a 17-year-old who is not a government employee or acting as one and is nevertheless doing this stuff, you know, are they a limited purpose public figure? Are they a public figure at all? Like, those are questions you have to ask. So we wanted to publish what we knew, which was important. It was like, what is going on? As far as who specifically was doing it, we needed to learn more about them. And, you know, that becomes, you know, if you have a source who's providing a name, obviously we had sources who provided names, right? Like, this is not a big mystery. Then it's going into a process of verification of, like, what can we find out about these people? What can we find out about their relationships to the government? What can we find out about their backgrounds? We're obviously frantically doing all that work. Once you do that, it does become more of a cascade because you're the source of information. And for us in that case, this was something, you know, I think on big stories that involve campaigns of coverage, you've seen in cases where a publication is really owning a story or owning a beat, part of the reason you become the place that people want to talk to about it is because they're literally reading you to find out what was happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, the government is millions of people. A lot of times people think of the government, in part due to shoddy political coverage. They think of the government as like 6 guys who hang out in the White House and they are all knowing, right? No, the government is millions and millions of people all over the country. And it's like any other workplace, right? It's like if you hit me with the truth serum and you were like, as a Condé Nast employee, what do you know about, you know, the New Yorker's plans to do X? I'd be like, I don't know, man. I saw David Remnick in the cafeteria getting some bok choy. Like, I don't know. Like, David Remnick doesn't come to me and tell me his secret schemes. I don't know everything that's going on the desks I oversee. You know, everybody has a very limited aperture. And this was a case where people were, you know, for information about what was going on in government broadly, but also in, you know, the agency they worked in, the department within that agency, or even in their own immediate office, things were happening they didn't understand. They're going to us, they're going to some other publications. Those are naturally people who, if they do have things they're worried about, they're concerned about, they think people should know about, you're going to go to the places that are clearly plugged in. It just mm-hmm. becomes self-perpetuating, especially as you see that they're continuing to protect sources. And if you are someone with inside knowledge, you can probably read some of the stories and read between the lines to see, like, I understand why they're positioning that way, you know, to protect people, which is, like, obviously source protection is always paramount. And, you know, not just obviously with this campaign of coverage, with everything that we do, you know, it's like somebody gives you information, and one of the first questions you should be asking is, like, who all has access to this? You know, if I'm glad you're telling me this, but I need to, do 3 people know this? Mm-hmm. Do 300 people know this? Like, just following through on that, and you know, not only covering things with authority, but in a way that's clearly careful, I think perpetuates that.
Well, this also makes me think about, so you were my predecessor as editor of Deadspin. Mm-hmm. You went on to run Gizmodo Media Group, RIP's, special projects mm-hmm. desk after that. You were at Vice. You, I would say, are sort of an expert at what I would describe as the intersection between gossip and journalism, where it's like rigorously reported and mm-hmm. impeccably fact-checked, but it is on topics that, like, maybe some, like, mainstream media outlets would consider beneath them, mm-hmm. right? Or too gossipy. Yeah. So, like, how did that kind of ethos, because that wasn't just you, right? There are a lot of folks on your team mm-hmm. who come from similar backgrounds, and I'm interested in how that kind of shaped the way you tackled this coverage.
It's hard for me to think about that because it's not like something I think about a lot. It's just I want to.
Yes, I'm asking for introspection.
I want to cover interesting stuff, right?
Sure.
And I want to cover stuff other people aren't covering, and a lot of times that is almost the weakness of that approach is that you can find yourself counterpunching and you cut yourself out of big areas that other places are covering. And maybe you're not going after something because whatever the case, you're like, ESPN's going to have the inside story on that. They're going to be able to talk to all the coaches and figure out why the play was diagrammed that way. So I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to try, right? Big downside of that approach. It can make it very hard to be consistently definitive. And that is something that you have to, like, I have to mitigate against. I have to make sure that I'm not always looking for maybe the more obscure story or the more neglected story just for the sake of it, right? On the positive side, I think it's just about sticking to what's interesting and what you can prove. I think a lot of the reason that, maybe like bigger outlets or whatever, they're a little more stodgy and they don't go after those kind of like gossipy stories is a lot of times they know about them. They don't, I don't even know if it's beneath them. It's how can you prove that? How like mechanically, how do you bring that from people are saying this to we have a story, and is it worth the effort? I think a lot of the people of this generation, like people who came up in the blog mines, had as like formative experiences. I know ESPN or whoever the big Death Star is, right? The Washington Post, whoever they are, they're going to get that. I probably can't. I have to do something different, and I have to figure out how to get it from here to there, and that opens up a wide array of tools that are kind of non-traditional, but work, whether that's like FOIA work, more technical investigations into how computer systems work, or what I think is probably in a lot of ways the best example, and certainly one where the lamestream media was not behind, was figuring out how to take whisper networks and get that from like, there are 50 women who are talking about this and like everybody in field X knows it. How do you engage with those sources? How do you protect them? How do you get that from everybody knows this to we have a story about this, and we have some on the record sources, but we have a lot of background sources. Those are all exemplars of that kind of mechanism. And I wouldn't even say it's like a mainstream media versus anything thing. I mean, like those people who came up doing that kind of work are now in, like more senior positions in media. And it's a great thing to see those sorts of things more widely distributed. And more generally, I think, there's this is a healthy part of decentralization of media, and the fact that you don't have like the model Chomsky and Herman were writing about, where functionally you have like the Times as an assignment desk and the networks as assignment desks that everybody are chasing. You don't have those bottlenecks. You have more ability of people to just pursue what they straight up think is interesting and place bets on it. But you have to have a willingness to do that. And it's like, I was talking earlier about some downsides. I think you need, it's not even a risk tolerance in terms of what you're willing to publish. It's risk tolerance in terms of what you're willing to spend time on without maybe getting anything out of it. Hitting a dead end, which is, harder nowadays just because newsrooms are smaller than they used to be. And so literally when you have fewer people and you still have the demands of like meeting the news cycle, you have to be really committed to tell someone like, yeah, go spend 2 weeks chasing that. And it's okay if you really don't get anything out of it, as long as you're trying your best.
Okay. I want to open this up for audience questions, but I can't resist asking you first. A lot of people don't think Wired should be in this area of coverage. Some of whom used to work for Wired, right? So Chris Anderson, the longtime editor-in-chief of Wired, seems to tweet multiple times a week these days about how like you're violating the ethos of what Wired was supposed to be, because it's supposed to be how tech is cool and blah, blah, blah. And venture capitalists are doing this, like tech execs are doing this. I don't even like have a question here. I just want to hear your rant about how stupid they all are.
I mean, I don't know if I have a rant in me because I think it's pretty self-evident. But I think a lot of times when I hear that, it's people talking about a period when they were younger and cooler and had more hair. And I'm not talking about anything specific or anyone specific. I'm just talking about the general tendency. But, you know, if you're a certain age, then maybe the 90s and the aughts were times when the tech industry as such was counterculture, and it was cool, and it was a place where the boldest, most heterodox thinkers were free to be their most, you know, liberated selves. That was a long time ago. You know, that was a long time ago. If you are someone who has first person memories of, you know, the halcyon days of tech in the Valley, like, I hate to tell you, man, but you're like somebody at that time who was going on about how great the hate was in the late 60s. And, you know, I don't think it's good to conflate a vibe or you know, your own personal hangups with where we are. I mean, this is not counterculture anymore. This is culture. The shit posters are running counterintelligence and you know, major government functions, and they're at the White House and they're exercising power. Like, there was a shift. You looked down and you looked up, and they were the new establishment. You are the new establishment. And so when you are literally running the government, running all the major financial institutions, and you have more power in many ways than any layer or level of government has, of course you're going to get more critically scrutinized. And I also think, especially with the talking point about how, like, the VCs do this and the VCs do that, I think, as with all of this, you don't want to lump everyone together. There are lots of VCs. Some of them are great. Some of them are not great. Some of them are good at business. Some of them are bad at business. Some of them are smart. Some of them are idiots. So the most frustrating thing to me is actually when people talk about tech as a discrete thing, and they always mean, like, the people in their group chat. They always mean their 20 buddies. They always mean the people who, you know, were at their wedding. Like, that's what they mean. It's like, tech is millions of people. Millions of people. You can't speak for it. It's not a class. It's not a geographic location. It might be a mindset, but to the extent you mean it as a mindset, it means people who think, like, really whacked out things. And I also think people should confront more the fact that, you know, the efficient markets hypothesis does not work as an explanation of how the market allocates capital, really. Like, you can do a lot of really fancy math if you want, and you live in Hyde Park to prove it, but it doesn't work. And it really doesn't work as a metaphor. Like, people are not rich because they're smart. They're rich for all sorts of reasons. Some people are rich because they're smart. Some people are really stupid and lucky. Some people were born with money. Some people were in the right place at the right time. You know, success is not proof of virtue. It's not even proof you know what you're talking about. And I think there are plenty of really high up people in the VC area, or who, you know, maybe started an app when they were in their 20s and have since been ensconced in a bubble that, like, literally protects them from any interaction with normal reality. There's lots of evidence these people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And I don't mean in any, like, I think their mental model of the world is slightly wrong, or I have different politics or anything like that. I mean in the sense that, like, they don't have information they would get if they were on Wikipedia. I mean, the best example of this to me was Mark Andreessen, whose name I can never pronounce, and I probably pronounced it incorrectly, and I apologize if I did, but he shared his chatbot prompt recently. And one of the lines in it was he was instructing his chatbot not to hallucinate. Which appears to suggest to me, and I'd love to talk to him about it to know what I meant. I don't want to impute anything that I can't prove, but it strongly suggests to me that he thinks the reason that LLMs provide inaccurate information in response to prompts is that no one has bothered to tell them to only produce accurate information. And when somebody is in a position to dictate, like, the allocation of capital across entire industries, to advise the White House to pick political candidates, or to advise on who's going to be running agencies or everything, and they're making an error on that level, I think if you're fundamental premise is that people who are critiquing either individuals like that or a system that would elevate individuals to that level of power are the ones who don't understand that might have more to do with your understanding of those systems and those people and where we are in 2026 as opposed to 10 years ago or 30 years ago than it does with the people interrogating or critiquing doing anything wrong. And I think I would finally say, when it comes to Wired specifically, that, you know, we're a publication that likes to be confrontational and have fun and have voice, but we're fundamentally a really buttoned down publication. You know, we are not, we are not throwing Molotov cocktails at anybody. We're really reporting. And I know that's a dodge that, you know, journalists always say, oh, I'm just reporting. I'm just drawing up the facts. Obviously, we have our things that we prioritize. We have our things that we don't prioritize. We have our people that we think are more worthy of scrutiny and less. And those all are informed by our own biases, and they're more than open to critique. But, you know, if you're a VC funded guy with a Substack who's positioning himself against, you know, the lamestream media, I don't know that you're all that countercultural, and I don't know that the funders of such publications, when they yearn for an aggressive and adversarial countercultural media, could deal with like an unconstrained tech deadspin, like one that was not worried about getting sued, or maybe even in some cases not even worried about being right. That publication, I'm past the point in my career and my life where I would particularly want to work for it, but I would read the hell out of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, you know, it's coming. Like, I don't know what format it will be in, but there's too much power. There are too many stories that are going untold, and there's too much just like sheer vitriol to be shared. There's too much anger for it not to be coming. And I, for one, am going to have a lot of fun seeing how people react to that kind of coverage.
A very eloquent rant from a man who said he didn't have a rant. Let's see what questions other folks have.
Thank you for both for that. That was great. I'm curious if you think there's a place for kind of what I think of as like traditional beat reporting in 2026, where the beat is defined not just by a specialty or a kind of notional area, but like a group of people that you're covering, in terms of like, you know, Capitol Hill press corps is a classic one, but there's obviously downsides, and I think beat reporters take a lot of hits for kind of sitting on the information that you're talking about, either because they want to trade it forward into the future, they don't want to lose their access or whatever. But I'm just curious kind of where you would place that, and whether you think there's any value in that or
I think there's a ton of value in that. And as an editor, and really as a manager, that's a lot of what I spend my time and thinking about. I apologize to anyone I work with who hears me say that and they say, well, I could use a response to that memo I sent you last week. But I think continually sharpening your beat and really thinking about who are the people, who are the institutions, what specifically you're covering, how do you act as an information broker, how do you trade off access versus the public's right to know, are things you need to think really consciously about and are more important now than maybe they were previously. I think the difference is that the institutions are more diffuse, they're more geographically spread out. They have to cover certainly in a national publication. I don't think it's as easy to show up in one physical place every day, have people get to know your face, have them come to associate your face with coverage they might or might not like, but know that you're accountable for. That's all harder. But the fundamental precepts of, like, you know, narrowing your focus, knowing what you're covering, knowing what you're not covering, knowing who all the key players are, knowing who they are. And when we talk about a beat and access in that way, like accountability really is the fundamental thing to me. Like, if you are routinely covering something over time, you should be building relationships, and people can be mad at you, they can be happy with you, they can be feeding you stuff, they can be withholding stuff, they can be punishing you by giving you to the competitors. All that stuff applies. The way to succeed there is to be correct and to be, you know, there to be yelled at, maybe not in person for the dynamics I was just talking about, but figuratively at least. And I think certainly at our publication we have we have people who own their beats, and that's what they want to do. I think if you own your coverage area and you have it defined well, like, all good things will happen. I mean, the trouble is having the institution that can, having the institutional backing to do that. It's that's the trick, but I think it's more like a business concern than anything.
Get one more question in.
So I was just wondering, you were talking about source protection and how important that was, and you mentioned that you have a lot of people on background, a lot of people not on the record, and I was just hoping you could talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like day to day and how you sort of, how you advise people on that and work with your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tell people this, and it sounds happy and it's true, but like our literal twin, the most important things to us are to be accurate and to protect the people, protect people who are sharing information with us. Like that's it. I'll talk about what I personally do as when I have my reporter hat on, because it's what I, share with people and they can use it or not. I don't like terms like on the record or off the record or background. I don't know what they mean. I literally don't know what they mean. This happens all the time when I'm talking to, especially in politics. I'll be talking to somebody and they'll be like, oh, I'm going to share this with you only on background. And I'm like, hold up. I'll be like, I don't know what that means. And they'll be like, oh, you're like actually a pretty well-known journalist. I'm like, those are not journalism terms. Like, those are terms from 70s movies. I don't know what they mean. I can tell you on the record, I can tell you what that means. That means everything we're going to talk about, I can print. The other terms, let's just talk about plain English. Off the record means I cannot use this information. I cannot seek to confirm it with anybody. I can use it for my own knowledge. It might inform records requests. It might inform questions I ask other people, but like I can't do anything else with it. When I tell people that, they are nearly invariably shocked. They're like, well, why would I tell you something if we couldn't use it? And I'm like, well, that's why we're having this conversation. So I like to start people off like we're assuming a source who is not like a sophisticated political operator, right? Like a comms person or someone like that. I will just tell them I would like to start off the record means everything I just said, because I want us to just talk. I want you to be able to talk freely and share with me what you want to share with me, and then we can talk. And I can also tell you about our process. If you give me information, I cannot just publish it. I will not be allowed to, even though I'm an editor. I'm working as a reporter right now. That means at least 2 other editors would have to vet that information for me to even bring it to them. I would have to have a way of confirming it, whether it was documentary proof, whether it was another person who was placed to know this, all that. And if it's, in this case, it would go to our research department. It would get legal, just walk them through the process, right? And the other thing I always tell people is like, and I assume because you're talking to me, you have some reason to trust me or to think I'm not going to screw you over here. But I think the main reason you can trust me is that no one would talk to me if I was screwing over or burning my sources, right? Like, it's really, like, my reputation is really important to me because I have a mortgage, I have kids. Like, I would like to be able to feed them and not have them out on the street. I can't do anything else other than journalism. Like, I have no other professional qualifications. So it's really important for me to be able to work. And for me to be able to work, I have to have people be able to trust me. So I can't guarantee anything. If SEAL Team 6 rappels in through my ceiling and they grab my phone, I can't tell you what happens. But I will do everything reasonable. Blah, 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 blah. Walk them through that process and tell them what are the potential points of vulnerability, especially if they're telling me something that could make them exposed legally or professionally. I think giving people that background and just walking them through and being very upfront about what the potential points of vulnerability for them, like, it's the ethical thing to do, and that you're just allowing them to make an informed decision about whether or not to talk to you or what to tell you if they do. It also, self-servingly, I think, walking them through that whole process, it is itself reason to trust you. Like, if you were, really sleazy, you wouldn't bother with all that. You'd be like, give me the stuff. I'm going to go publish it right now. And it provides a framework for what's hopefully an ongoing conversation. It gives them an explanation for why you're asking them certain questions. Or you might be asking, like, do 300 or 300 people have access to this, right? You're not asking that out of nowhere. you're making it very clear to them, this is why I want to know that, and it's something you need to think about before you tell me this. I have to trust you. You have to defend yourself, right? Like, I can do everything I can to defend you, but I can do everything perfectly, and because of something you did, you might not be in place. And that's why we'll do things like send people our guides to how to communicate securely, or we'll ask, in some cases, we'll just ask people like really granular questions about how they have access to this or how they're communicating with us. And, we'll share like, hey, if you want to be really paranoid here, the best way to share that information is through the post office. You should drive like an hour from your house, and assuming that you haven't printed this out in a way that'll identify you, all that good stuff, like mail it in. A lot of times people want technological solutions to problems, and it's like the lower tech you go, the more, I don't mean to ramble about it. It's something I could go on about for hours, but I think a lot of it is just being like hyper transparent with sources, and more than anything explaining like the structure and process of the work you're doing with them so that they can identify the potential vulnerabilities, because no matter how good a job I do, I'm not working in that office. I don't know what the potential weaknesses are. They're the ones who ultimately have to make that evaluation. So it's important for them to have all the awareness they need to make that evaluation, and then ultimately take the risk of sharing information. It's not perfect, and I don't mean to be on a high horse about it, because, well, it's my worst nightmare. It's entirely possible. I and a source could do everything right, and they could still be exposed. It's inherently risky, but making that clear is a big part of the process, and an important thing to do. And just, maybe more than anything, just always keeping it front of mind. I know I have not always done that. I've, probably put people in bad positions without knowing it earlier in my career. And so just being mindful and maybe a root remembering, you're talking to people and they're trusting you with a lot.
Thank you.
Tim Marchman, it's always fun to talk shop over a beer with you, but thank you for... Oh, I wasn't shaking your hand, but let's do it. No, I love it. Thank you for doing this. Very fun.
Thank you.
The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. Our producer is Amanda Darrach. Thank you so much to Jimmy's Corner and owner Adam Glenn for having us. Thank you to our amazing crew, Mark Van Hare, Fernando Fermino, and Alex Hamm. Thank you to the CJR staff. Thank you to Susie Banikaram for all her support. Thank you to Editor-in-Chief Betsy Moraes. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back with you soon.